Some stories don't end in a whisper, they end in motion. They end the way a life like Charlie Henderson's was always going to end, not in a house surrounded by family, but somewhere out on the road, somewhere between one broken promise and the next. This is Finding Grandpa Charlie. I'm Irv Lenzy. And today's story is about the end of a man who didn't believe in endings. The final year of a life spent dodging the past when someone in town said the thing folks had been saying for a while. Charlie's gone missing. It started officially on a Monday, March 5th, 1962. Carlsbad, New Mexico. Charlie, 82 years old by then, was admitted to the hospital. There was no fanfare, just a quiet entry in the Carlsbad newspaper. The newspaper listed him as a patient admitted that day. That's how it worked back then. Your name went in the paper if you landed in the hospital. There were no privacy laws. People just wanted to know who was sick. What he was treated for, I don't know. Could have been pneumonia. Could have been a fall, could have been just about anything. He was living alone at 627 Legion Avenue in Carlsbad. Remember that address, you'll hear it again, 627 Legion Avenue. By all accounts, he was still managing on his own, but something changed. He stayed a full week, discharged on March 12th. That matters because 18 days later, Charlie left home. This time, he didn't return, and someone finally picked up the phone and filed the first and only missing persons report ever recorded under his name. It was a Thursday afternoon, March 29th, 1962. Charlie had told someone that he was headed over to Artesia, about 40 miles north, to, quote, check on a rest home. Now, whether that was for himself or someone else, it's lost to history, but I think the implication is clear. He wasn't as steady as he once was. Maybe the hospital stay spooked him. Maybe someone told him it was time to start thinking about a nursing home. Maybe he just wanted to know what it would feel like to be one step ahead of the undertaker. He left in his car, not just any car, a 1949 Hudson, or possibly a 1950. The records aren't consistent, but either way, it was a wide-bodied beast of a vehicle. Hudsons were built like battleships, low-slung, heavy, with that wrap-around rear window that made it look like the car was already halfway to the next century. But by 1962, that car was already a dozen years old, and Hudson, the company, didn't even exist anymore. They'd been bought by American Motors Corporation, which was created in '54 when two struggling car companies, Hudson and Nash, merged just to survive. They became known for quirky, affordable cars like the Rambler, Gremlin, and later, the Jeep. By the late 80s, AMC itself was gone, bought out by Chrysler in '87, and they just wanted the Jeep. So by the time Charlie was driving his old Hudson in the early 60s, he was already riding around in a car made by a company that no longer existed. A ghost driving a ghost. Parts for it may have been rare. Repairs were probably patchwork. If Charlie's Hudson was still running, it was running on willpower and prayers, or maybe just stubbornness, which in Charlie's case was maybe the same thing. Still, he climbed behind the wheel wearing what the report said was a light brown suit and a gray hat. A man dressed like he had somewhere important to be. And he headed north. The road between Carlsbad and where Charlie was heading isn't long, just under 40 miles long. It climbs through wind-carved plateaus and scrubs of creosote bush. In late March, the weather would have been dry, mild, mid-60s in the daytime, colder at night. The sky out there stretches forever. It's the kind of place where a man could vanish by taking the next curve too slow. People drive it in under an hour, but Charlie didn't come back that evening. Not that night, not the next morning. By noon the next day, Friday, March 30th, the Carlsbad police officially listed him as missing. It's the only time his name appears on a law enforcement record that I know of. The one time someone said in writing that Charlie Henderson was gone. What I find haunting is this. Charlie was already fading. His body knew it. The hospital had probably said as much, but I don't think he wanted to disappear in bed, an IV in his arm, and a clipboard at his feet. He'd spent decades avoiding the end. Now it was catching up, and so he did what Charlie always did. He got in the car and drove. It wasn't until October 10th, 1963, a year and a half after he vanished in the Carlsbad newspaper, that the mystery finally caught up to him. We don't know what happened between the two dates or why he was even in New Mexico. But Thursday afternoon, just after 12 p.m. on that date, Charlie Henderson was driving south on U.S. Highway 385, about 4 miles outside of Seminole, Texas. He was now 83 years old, behind the wheel of a faded 1952 Chevrolet sedan. The Hudson, somehow gone, probably gave up the ghost back in Carlsbad. Next to him sat a man no one in my family has ever heard of. I'll get back to him in a few minutes. There was the semi-truck. It was a butane tanker loaded with nearly 8,400 gallons of liquid gas. Nobody knows why or how, but Charlie was suddenly driving on the wrong side of the highway. When the semi collided with Charlie's car, the impact flipped the entire tanker. Witnesses said it bounced 3 times before slamming to a rest 174 feet and 5 inches from the point of impact. The driver of the semi survived with minor injuries. Charlie and the man riding with him did not. They were both rushed to the Seminole Memorial Hospital where doctors tried to stabilize them, but it was no use. The injuries were too severe. The description of their bodies is not appropriate for this podcast. They died within minutes of each other, about an hour after the crash. The highway stayed closed for nearly 5 hours. Local fire crews feared an explosion. The trailer still held about 2,500 gallons of pressurized butane when it came to arrest. Firefighters stayed on site. Local firefighters misting the tanker to keep it cool to prevent it from blowing up. Railroad workers had to be brought in to save the day. They constructed 2 massive A-frame rigs to lift the wreck. It was a miracle, but it did not ignite. Charlie and the man beside him were gone. The newspaper called the passenger a hitchhiker. Said that he was 63 from California, which piqued my interest initially. But that wasn't true. He turned out to not be from California at all. He likely wasn't just passing through. I don't buy that. I don't buy the hitchhiker story. They got everything else wrong. Once again, Charlie Henderson was gone. Not just from the road, but from the story. There was no obituary, no funeral that we know of, just a name and a wrecked Chevy on a stretch of Texas highway. An inferno of a news story that spread through newspapers in West Texas and beyond. The newspapers called the man a hitchhiker, said he was 63 from California, but like a lot of things in this story, it turned out to not be the truth. His name was Jack Shelton. He was born in Seymour, Texas back in 1910, not 63, 53. And he wasn't from California. The address listed for him, 1440 Sylvan Street in Van Nuys, California, was either old, fake, or someone else's. I looked it up. It doesn't appear to exist today because Shelton had a paper trail of his own, and it didn't lead to a quiet retirement home. It led through back roads, prison gates, felonies, and a string of traveling carnivals. Yeah, he was a felon. He'd done time in Idaho, served a sentence, walked out. Later, he drifted up through Portland, Oregon, maybe trying to go straight, or maybe just trying to not be found. He had a wife once, or at least he did on paper, but by 1963, he was moving alone. I don't know how he met Charlie. Nobody does, but I don't think he was a stranger. You don't ride shotgun in a two-door Chevy with someone you just met on the side of the road. Not for that long, not that far. From Carlsbad all the way to Texas? Especially not if you're carrying a pass like Shelton's. There's no record what they were doing together, no receipts, no bags, no map with a circle in it. Just a body in a hospital and a silence behind it. No one claimed Jack Shelton's remains, no obituary. No family contact. No known next to kin. They buried him in Seminole Cemetery 2 days later, unclaimed, unnamed in the plot. Just a number in a ledger and a death certificate. A man erased, like the one who was driving him. 2 men died in that car, but only one of them left a mystery, and the other, he may have been part of it. By the time of the crash, Charlie had been living in New Mexico for years. His death certificate listed his home address as 627 Legion Avenue in Carlsbad. Yeah, that's the same address mentioned in the missing persons report from March of 1962. The same place he left from when he told someone he was going to Artesia to check on a rest home. That little house on Legion Avenue was probably not fancy. Just a quiet house in a working-class neighborhood not far from the Pecos River. And for a man like Charlie, a man who had already lived 2 lives and run from 2 families, maybe that little house was all he needed. A place where no one asked questions, where he could be left alone. We know he was there in March of 62. He's listed in the hospital log at Carlsbad Memorial. That's just 2 weeks before the missing persons report ran in the newspaper. No one said why he was there. Maybe his health was starting to slip. Maybe he was trying to figure out what came next. But whatever the case, he went driving to Texas in that old car with Jack Shelton. Maybe he knew the road was running out. Maybe he was going on one last adventure. I think he was trying to figure out how to face the end. But what I don't understand is why he ended up 60 miles the opposite direction over in Texas, driving towards Seminole. It's not a place you just end up in. You don't just find yourself there. You go there for a reason. So what was his? Was he visiting someone, running from something? The truth is, I don't know. And for whatever reason, whatever plan he had when he pulled that old Chevy onto the highway, it died with him, just like it always did. Years before I found the crash report, before I pieced together the censuses and draft cards and hospital logs, I heard another story about the 60s. Someone came looking. They were looking for Charlie's heirs. A pair of lawyers knocked on a door. Not mine, not my dad's. They went to see Uncle Albert, Charlie's oldest surviving son from his first marriage. They told him that his father had recently died, that there was an estate to settle. Not missing, just dead. Albert didn't know what to say. He told him his daddy died decades ago and they had the wrong man. And as far as we all know, that was the end of it. Beyond that, there's almost nothing. But like everything else with Charlie, this trail just stops short. There's no probate file. I can't find anything. There's no will, no record of a settlement. Now, I haven't driven to Carlsbad or New Mexico to look in person, and I might never be able to do that. But whatever Charlie left behind, if he left anything at all, it was lost in the silence. It's hard to know what to make of this story. Sometimes I wonder if there was more to it than that. Could Charlie actually have had money? Could he have owned land? It doesn't make sense. He was a wanderer, a drifter, always living alone, had been retired for near 20 years. It doesn't fit the image that I've built of him in my mind. Charlie drove old vehicles. He lived simply, moved often. He wasn't flashy. He didn't live like a man who had much, or at least wanted to be noticed. But that doesn't necessarily mean he was broke. Maybe he was just frugal. There are versions of the story, family whispers really, that say Uncle Albert bought a new car around that time, that he suddenly had money that he shouldn't have had. I've heard I've heard the story more than once. I've never seen any proof. To me, it sounds more like myth than fact. But still, the question nags at me. Both my father and his father were known to be tight with money. It used to drive my mom insane, or so she says. So maybe Charlie was just like them. Maybe he hoarded what little he had, not because he was wealthy, but because that's what men in this family do. So Charlie died on the highway. There's no census record for Charlie after 1950. Beyond that little house on Legion Avenue in Carlsbad, there's almost no trace of him at all. And yet, we know he lived. Still walking into rooms, breathing, still driving a faded car down long desert highways. He lived longer than anyone expected, longer than anyone thought he did, long enough to be counted and then forgotten. You might think that no one claimed Charlie's body. I certainly did. But he didn't die alone. His death certificate says otherwise. He was buried in Terrace Cemetery in Post, Texas, a quiet, dusty town about 75 miles east of where he died. And Post just happened to be the home of his younger brother, Carol Kendrick Henderson, CK. The records don't say it directly, but I believe it was CK who stepped in. The timeline fits. CK was still alive then, and Post was his home. It would have taken a day or two to arrange, maybe 3 at most. Charlie died on October 10th, 1963. He was likely buried by the 12th or the 13th. So, in the end, he wasn't entirely forgotten. One person, one brother, may have stood at his graveside. Still, there was no obituary, no service that I know of. He wasn't buried near Henrietta, not beside Marie, not with his parents at Shiloh and Bonham, not with his grandparents. Just a patch of West Texas dirt, a few rows back from the road under the hot, blistering West Texas sun. Whatever Charlie had built in his life, he outlived. Whatever family he had, he walked away from twice. But in the end, maybe family found him one last time. Maybe the silence didn't get the last word after all. For a long time, I believe I inherited nothing from Charlie Henderson. But that wasn't true. I inherited something more insidious. I inherited a question, a hole in the family narrative that no one could fill, a silence that crept from one generation to the next. And over time, that silence became mine to carry. People sometimes assume I'm angry at Charlie. Maybe a little, but not really. I've never met the man. I don't have enough of him to be angry at. What I have is exhaustion from wondering, from piecing together fragments, from trying to stitch a story out of omission. Because his disappearance didn't just erase a man, it erased all the things that would have come with him. His laugh, his voice, the way he signed his name when he wasn't filling out a government form. I never heard of my great-grandfather. I never heard his voice. I don't know if he was a hard man or a gentle one. I don't know what his favorite meal was. What did he eat for breakfast? Or whether he sang hymns at church or gambled on Sunday nights. I've never stood at his grave. I've felt the shape of his absence all my life, and the way my father never spoke of him, and the stories that weren't told, and the photographs that were never shown. Charlie didn't just leave once, he left again and again, until all that remained of him were government records and rumors. This story didn't begin with Charlie, and it doesn't end with him either, but somewhere along the way, he handed it off, quietly, without warning, and now it's mine. Not as a burden, exactly, more like a responsibility, a promise that I won't let him disappear again. There's one more record out there, one more box that hasn't been opened. The 1960 U.S. Census, sealed for privacy like all federal census records, is scheduled for release in 2032, and I'll be waiting. It may not hold anything new. Maybe Charlie won't be in it at all. Maybe he was between addresses, staying off the books like he had so many times before. Or maybe, just maybe, there will be one more entry, one more address, one more line that says he's still here, still moving, still living in the space between vanishing and being found. The mystery didn't end in a twisted car on the side of the highway. Charlie's story lives on, not just in records, but in people, and descendants he never met, his grandchildren who never saw his face, and voices like mine still trying to understand what it means to be descended from someone who didn't want to be known, who faked his death, and who ran. So I'll be watching in 2032 because I still believe there's one more place he might turn up, one more moment where the past gives up a secret. And if not, that's all right too, because I've already found him in ink and blood and in the smoke he left behind. That's it for this first season of Finding Grandpa Charlie. I'm Irv Lenzy. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. There's going to be more episodes. We're going to explore New Mexico. We're going to explore things and people I have found there. No spoilers, but we'll talk about some more family stories. We'll dig back and talk about Charlie's great-grandfather. And we'll talk about the possibility of me getting a Texas First Family Certificate, because I can now prove that my family was in Texas during the days of the Republic, when Texas was its own country. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment, leave a question. I do have a website. It should be in the show notes. Thanks, everybody, for supporting me this season. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.